baseball's loss of innocence, the big fix, the curse of the Black Sox. Whatever you call it, it shaped baseball forever. It's responsible for the appointment of a single commissioner of baseball, many books and movies, and a World Series drought for one of baseball's oldest franchises. This is what you don't know about the 1919 Black Sox scandal. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Blake, and this is Matt.
Howdy.
Today, we're going to tell you about a very important occurrence in baseball's history, and that is the Black Sox scandal of 1919. What is your favorite sports scandal across any sport? Doesn't have to be baseball.
There's one currently ongoing with the Washington football team that has me a little salty right now, but I don't think that's it. I think as a native North Carolinian, it has to be the most recent and the biggest one recently is the entire Carolina fiasco of about a decade ago with Butch Davis and an assistant coach with the name Black Santa and Miles Austin tweeting out pictures of meals at $100 establishments and players not going to class and paper classes, and the NCAA acquiescing to the fact that if the school lets regular students cheat, that they could also let the athletes cheat as well, which is weird. I think all of that put together, I guess if you're a Carolina fan, you hate to hear it. If you're an NC State or Duke fan or a Wake Forest fan, for the five of them that are out there, they love to hear it. But yeah, I think that's the one, just because it was entertaining. Not even that it was a rival school. It's just entertaining, all of the things that came out and the way it was handled and the way that the NCAA or UNC just lawyered up and was like, nah, fam, like everybody cheated, so it's legal. The NCAA was like, yeah, actually.
Yeah, the only time Carolina fans hear anything about that is when fans from other North Carolina institutions bring it up, because we like to forget that it happened, and they just don't let us. So yeah, that's unfortunate. If I had to choose one, and it's one that we've covered on this show, which is why I know so much about it, is the point shaving scandal from CCNY. That one was really interesting, and before we recorded that, I actually had not really heard of that either, but it's got similar vibes to this story. This, of course, it's not professional baseball. You're dealing with like 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids at CCNY in the 50s, but these are grown men making these decisions, and but a lot of similarities with gamblers and bookies and money and throwing games and stuff. So that's what this reminded me of as I was researching it and stuff. I was like, this has happened before, and it's not just baseball. And so I think that would be my choice.
I think there's a lot of these scandals. There's one in NC State's history with some point shaving situations, and I think there's a lot of similarities. Like when you get to that point, they tend to have the same kind of characters and seedy backgrounds and things that happen. So yeah, for sure. And they're always interesting. It doesn't matter. It's always interesting stuff on these point shaving, throwing game stuff things.
Yep. So flashback 102 years ago to the 1919 World Series. The White Sox come off a great regular season, obviously winning the pennant to go to the World Series, a 9-game best-of-9 World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. The players, though, were not very happy with their owner, Charles Comiskey. He had a reputation of sorts. He was resented for being cheap and not compensating his players appropriately. One interesting thing I found about contracts that some people may not be aware of that was in play here is the reserve clause. There is a history of this reserve clause being in basically every American sport. But basically, what it did is it gave teams ridiculous power over the players in their contracts. They basically signed 1 year deals every year. There was no free agency. As a matter of fact, this reserve clause era, kind of in baseball specifically, was replaced by free agency after a Supreme Court case. Somebody argued a player in the 70s argued their case against their contract, and it went to the Supreme Court, and then the reserve clause got overthrown. But basically, players could either do one of two things. They could either sign the contract offered to them by the team, or they sit out for a year and they're completely unpaid. Or I guess you could go off and like barnstorm or something if you wanted to play some kind of baseball, but nobody really wanted to do that because that didn't make a whole lot of money. That was last resort. So I wanted to put that out there because contracts in 1919 were very different than they are today.
100%. That reserve clause actually is something that was challenged a lot through baseball's early history. At one point, there was a players' league that rose up in response to this, and it was challenged in court because part of the Sherman Antitrust Act says that you can't have two competing companies collude to set prices on salaries. And so this is where the famous professional sports are exempt from the antitrust laws. That comes from a challenge against the reserve clause. On some level, the reserve clause works because it's in the team's best interest to pay the player to play ball with the player, at least on salary, so they don't take the option of just sitting out a year, right? You see this in the NFL with holdouts where guys sometimes choose to sit out. But it is also not great for the players because you never get the chance to go somewhere else. It's either your team pays you or they trade you to somebody else, and then you're stuck there. So I think we're in a better situation. You can argue better or worse from a viewership watching the sport standpoint, but I think for the players, obviously better, much better situation.
It's a whole different world. But just wanted to clarify that's going to kind of lay a groundwork that these players were almost stuck. Not almost stuck, but they were on the Chicago White Sox under an owner that supposedly was cheap and wasn't compensating them, and that kind of sets the foundation for the story. So, moving forward to September 21st of 1919, this is right towards the end of the season, beginning of the playoffs time, at the beginning of the World Series. A meeting is going to take place among the White Sox players. Chick Gandil is going to be the ringleader of this whole meeting thing. He calls this meeting with players of his team in a New York City hotel room to plan to throw the World Series games for compensation, for money. Gandil had a history in baseball and not a great one. His history makes it so that this fact isn't overly surprising. The fact that he's come up with this scheme and he knows the gamblers and stuff, it's not overly surprising. He was drafted by a team. He was drafted by, I believe, a team in Cleveland in the late 1900s. And after he didn't make the team the following season, they told him to report back to his old team, and he refused. Moved across the country with his wife. Played some other lower level baseball in California. Stole money from them and got arrested while he was out. Like he's a character, and so this isn't overly surprising if you read up on Gandil, but. So he made friends, Gandil did, with a guy named Joseph Sullivan, who was a bookmaker and gambler from where? Boston. He was playing for the Washington Senators at the time.
Boston, not surprising. Yeah, that's not surprising either. They've got a history. Yeah.
And so Gandil makes friends with Sullivan while he's in Washington playing for the Senators. And Sullivan basically said, "Hey, Gandil, you've got some money coming your way if you throw these games." And he said, "Okay, but you can't throw a baseball game with just one person. So what do? You call a meeting and see who else is on board." So That's what he did, and that's where this meeting came from. So this group of 8, it's this famous 8 thing. You've probably heard the 8 Men Out series of book title and movie and all of the other things where that was taken into place. This group of 8 White Sox players conspired. So this pitcher, one of the pitchers on the team, Red Faber, who was not in on the scheme, he got sick with the flu right before the World Series started. This allowed 2 pitchers who were in on the scandal, Eddie Cicotte and Lefty Williams, to pitch 6 of the games in this best of 9 World Series for the White Sox. And spoiler alert, those 2 pitchers would go 1-5 in their 6 appearances in this series. And after game 1, word started circulating that something was up. On the second pitch of the game, Eddie Cicotte hits a Cincinnati Reds batter, which basically signaled to the bookmakers this deal was on and we're going to throw this series. And so after that happened, supposedly word started getting around. Comiskey started getting word. People around Major League Baseball started getting worried, and the odds that favored the White Sox tanked right around this game one time. Bettors betting on the Reds before game 1 would have to accept even money or slightly worse. That's how much the books flipped right before the series started. And so that made people suspicious. And then, of course, they go out, and I think they lost the first game 9-1 or something. Like, it wasn't close at all. And so that made everybody suspicious. But this is, can you see the path we're heading down? It's like a cliff that it's straight down. It's going to be great.
It is never a good sign for odds to flip in huge ways. Because it either means that somebody's hurt, something bad has happened, or without it being too much of a conspiracy, sometimes it is where someone is hurt, somebody's not going to play, and it's not common knowledge that that's going to happen yet. So when odds start to flip, you know that something is afoot. Usually it's not something illegal. Obviously, in this case, it was. But if you ever see odds flip as much as they would have for this World Series, where people start to know that things are not going correctly, it's a good idea to run away from that thing as fast as you can. Something's not right. Somebody's lying about an injury. Somebody's letting information leak. Something just isn't the way it should be.
So we're down a path of no return at this point. So the White Sox would lose games 1 and 2. Mind you, Cicotte and Lefty Williams would pitch those 2 games. They would each lose. Game 3, the White Sox would win. Their third rotational pitcher, Dickie Kerr, would win the game for them in a shutout. He would shut out the Reds in Game 3. Game 4, Dickie Kerr. Cicotte comes back up in Game 4. He loses. Lefty Williams comes back up in Game 5. He loses. Dickie Kerr comes back up for the White Sox in Game 6. He wins. So now the series is 4-2. Remember, this is a best of 9, so first to 5 wins. It was around this time that the players started supposedly they were not being compensated by their original agreement with the gamblers and the sports bettors. And so they basically went to the gamblers and said, listen, if we don't get our money, we're just going to win the games and you're going to be out a lot of money and a lot of people are going to be mad at you. And so it's alleged around this time that this happened, and by happenstance or not, Cicotte goes out in Game 7 and they win. So now it's a 4-3 series. Well, threats of violence were made by the gamblers against the players and their families at this point, basically saying, you better lose this because we've got a lot of money on the line here. And so Lefty Williams goes out in Game 8, which is weird to say and think about, but a Game 8 of the World Series, Lefty Williams loses, which means he lost 3 decisions in the same series, which has either never happened or has not happened in a long time since the World Series flipped to 7 games, but I don't remember. Somebody give me that answer later. But so the White Sox would lose in 8 games. And the conspirators, the famous eight, are paid between $5,000 and $35,000 each across the series for losing these games on purpose. Gandil, of course, would be the highest paying because he set it up. So supposedly he was supposed to be paid the 35,000, but everyone else below him was paid less. But so that's how we get to this point. Is lots of errors during the games, fielding mistakes, all kinds of, and there's some controversy with that too. We can get into it in a minute, but
Yeah.
it was clearly purposeful on some part.
Yeah, and it follows kind of the lock, stock, and barrel, the point shaving formula. You had disgruntled players, one of them with connections to people that he probably should not have, especially in 1919. And I mean, it's not necessarily taking advantage of the situation, but capitalizing on a situation that was advantageous to the gamblers and the bookmakers that had these players in their pocket. You always get that as the start, and then the players willingly jump into it. They do it. There's always some uncertainty because now you are doing a shady thing and you are in with shady people. You can't trust shady people by definition. So it's in your back of your mind, like, am I actually going to get paid, or am I just making this dude thousands of dollars that I'm not going to see? So they do the thing where they win a game they're not supposed to, forgetting that in fact they are dealing with shady people. So then their families get threatened because if if you're willing to throw the biggest sporting event in the country at that time, you're also willing to do some other shady things to make sure it goes through. The bookmakers would have been in deep trouble had this been a White Sox victory. The folks, Joseph Sullivan and company that would have been involved on the financing side, they would have been in a lot of issues there. So they would have been willing to do whatever it took to make sure it happened.
And speaking of shady people doing shady things, another one of the guys involved on the gambling side of all of this, not the players, but the other side in this whole thing, was Arnold Rothstein, who you may have heard of if you know anything about the mob in New York City and stuff at this time. He was a very well known made guy in New York City. He was the kingpin of the Jewish mob in the early 1900s. He died at the age of 46 by gunshot wounds, if that tells you anything about who he was. So, back to the White Sox. A grand jury convenes actually at the end of the 1920 season. There's some argument as to who knew and who didn't know about throwing the World Series, but basically it ended. The offseason came. Almost all of the 1920 regular season is played before this happens. And a grand jury is convened in September of 1920, and this is when Seacott confesses to the grand jury about his role in throwing the previous World Series. Well, once this happens, it's public record and everybody knows. And so Comiskey suspends 7 players on the White Sox roster. Chick Gandil, the fine gentleman that he was, he did not return to the team after the 1919 World Series, and so he could not be suspended. But the other 7 that were involved were suspended, and they were suspended with 3 games left in the regular season. They were in the middle of a pennant race with Cleveland, and basically suspending these 7 players. Comiskey didn't really have a choice. It cost them the pennant in 1920. Cleveland ended up winning and going to the World Series instead of the White Sox, but Comiskey didn't really have a choice. And so the grand jury indicted 8 players and 5 gamblers in October of 1920. Fast forward to when the trial actually begins the following summer, 1921. The defense rests. After about a month, there were some delays because a couple of the folks a couple of the players that were indicted got sick or something, and they got delayed. And so it took about a month. The defense rested. In less than 3 hours of deliberation, a jury returned a not guilty verdict for all players. Now, this is when Kennesaw Mountain Landis would be appointed as the original commissioner of Major League Baseball. The original idea was for him to head a 3-person panel, and he said, "Nope, the only way I'm doing this is if I'm the only one, and the only way I'm doing this is if I get basically untapped power over all the teams and all the players." And so they gave it to him, and then he immediately bans all 8 players from organized baseball for life. The White Sox president Comiskey then releases the 7 banned players because what are they going to do on the roster? And then Gandil out in California with his new wife, he ended up playing semi-pro baseball and doing some other things. But this would lead to the curse of the Black Sox, which is probably
Oh
where
yeah.
you've heard of this before. They finished 7th in the league in 1921, would not win the American League until 1959, and then would not win a World Series until 2005. What do you why don't more leagues permanently ban cheaters like they did in this case?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two reasons that he banned them, and he banned them for life, really. Number one is the fact that this went to a federal trial, and one of the conspirators confessed. Obviously, legally, they were found not guilty. We know that while jurors are instructed to deliberate based on just the facts of the case, that sometimes celebrities don't have to endure the facts of the case. Sometimes people go in a jury room and they just say, you know what, I don't think they meant to do it. I know this person, right? No, not guilty. And so whatever with that, but it was publicized all over the place. And this would be the same today. A gambling scandal is one of the things that I think is able to destroy an entire league and potentially an entire sport, like an actual gambling scandal. In this case, to throw the World Series, it's about as big as you can get. You have to do something that says we are not doing this anymore, right? Like steroids in baseball, everybody had some idea that there's a reason these people are hitting all these home runs. These people in the batter's box are freaking gigantic. Even in the most recent season, right? People are using the weird spider tack stuff on baseballs. They're chunking them. Maybe the baseball's doctored by baseball itself to make more home runs happen. Those things aren't big scandals because on some level, everybody's participating. But in a gambling scandal where the results, like what you're actually seeing on the field, you can't trust, that'll destroy a sport in a heartbeat, because now what is the point of me going? They're not actually trying, the athletes. They're trying to lose. I don't know. If something every time something weird happens, this guy, he makes an error, he overthrows home, he hits a batter, he doesn't run a ball out to first base. Like how many guys do that in a year? Or football, they don't finish out a route because they know the ball's not coming to them. In basketball, they just take a play off. But now it's not just taking a play off, it's questioning, is this person trying to throw the game? And you cannot have that. You cannot have that because it's not entertaining. There's no point. So I think in this case, he was hired to get gambling out of the sport. And the best way to do that is to show that you be free to gamble all you want to. Hope that you make a bunch of money doing it because it's the last money you're going to make in this sport. Goodbye.
So all of these suspensions, it did go a little bit wider than just these 8 players on the White Sox. At least one other player, I believe, got caught up in it. So this wasn't a new thing with baseball. Like this was a somewhat common occurrence for the time. And so I say somewhat common, like every team wasn't throwing games, but these 8 guys were not the only ones doing it. And so there were more suspensions than just this 8, but this group of suspensions that happened at this time were the most suspensions of any duration to be simultaneously imposed in baseball until, you brought it up a second ago, the biogenesis scandal in 2013, where 13 players were suspended, all between like 50 and 200 and something games. depending on who got in trouble the most, I guess. So with that said, we have trivia.
I am ready this time. I swear to God, if you ask me like who was the first man to throw a pitch in the World Series, like I'm gonna nail it. I'm gonna get it right.
Let's go.
Doesn't matter what your question is. I've got it 100% of the time this time.
I will admit the last couple of trivia questions have maybe not been unfair, but they have been pretty difficult. This one is not as much, I don't think, with as much as you know about baseball, but we'll see.
The World Series one last time was not actually hard. I was just an idiot that day.
Who won the 2019 World Series? That's all it was. That was it, folks.
I know, and I could not. All I had to know was that answer, and I was just sitting here like, who, when, what?
Well, we'll see.
COVID.
We're going to find out. And so this trivia question is in relation to this scandal because one of the 8 players who were suspended, who were on the 1919 White Sox team, and whose participation in this scandal is probably one of the most debated things in baseball, maybe. His name is Shoeless Joe Jackson. He was one of the...
Say it ain't so, Joe.
Say it ain't so, Joe. Supposedly that didn't happen either. That was made up.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, completely made
up. His batting average, his career batting average, everybody knows the rules, 10 questions, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We'll get to it. So your question is, Shoeless Joe Jackson's .356 career batting average is 4th best in history, surpassed only by these 3 men. Now remember, the Negro Leagues are now the major leagues. That might be a hint.
Yeah, so obviously I think one of them is a player from the Negro Leagues because I think all the people who haven't refreshed their knowledge have Joe Jackson as the 3rd best hitter of all time, but he's been pushed down the list since then. So can you give me teams for the guys above him? Who they play for?
So, numero uno on the list played for the Detroit Tigers.
Yeah, he did.
For all but 2 of his seasons. So, the 2nd place player played for teams such as the Indianapolis ABCs, the St. Louis Giants, the Harrisburg Giants, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and a couple more, the Toledo Crawfords. If this gives you any indication of...
Was he ever a Gray? Did he ever play for the Homestead Grays?
It does not.
Okay.
Yes, one time for one season, it looks like.
Okay. All right. Then the other guy would have been the original number 2.
In the number 3 spot on this list, he played for St. Louis, New York Giants, the Boston Braves, the Chicago Cubs, the St. Louis Cardinals, the St. Louis Browns.
And again, this is for you people riding around in your cars. We're hoping you get this answer too. What years would they have been active? All early 1900s.
Generally, really, all 3 of these gentlemen. Well, 2 of the 3 gentlemen are definitely considered contemporaries of Joe Jackson. One of the top 3 being a Negro League player. Depends on how you look at it. But yes, he also played, the Negro League player in the top 3 also played from 1920 to 1941. So around, it's still fairly the same, or maybe a little after these guys.
Did the player in 3rd play like early 1900s, like potentially 1800s baseball?
So 3rd on the list played from 1915 to 1937.
Ooh. May not be who I was thinking about then. Okay. What positions did these people play?
Third on the list, played second baseman, shortstop, and third baseman. So basically the infield. Second on the list, center fielder and first baseman. And first on the list was a center fielder.
All right. I know for sure two of them. That is all the questions I can ask, and like, I don't know any other clever ways to get people to know it. Number one all time is Ty Cobb, who is the meanest man
Ding, ding,
to
ding.
ever play baseball. Yeah. The third place guy, one of the most expensive baseball cards you can get, is Rogers Hornsby.
Ding, ding, ding.
All right. So let's figure out this. Let's figure out who is in second. It's not Josh Gibson.
We have not done an episode on this individual.
I was about to say, because that would have been way too easy to just know that answer.
He's probably high on this list, but he is not in second.
I gotta say that I don't know who would have been counted as the all-time Negro League batting average person. Man, I'm gonna blow it here. I knew that.
You had it until I found out that.
All right.
I expanded the list on you.
It's not Josh Gibson. It's not Buck O'Neil, because it wouldn't be. And it's too early. Oh man. Nope. I don't know. Who is it? Who is in second?
So this is interesting. Second place on this list is Oscar Charleston.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Oscar Charleston. Okay, so Ty Cobb had a career 366. Charleston was a 364. Hornsby a 358, and then Joe Jackson a 355. Quick research on Baseball Reference to Josh Gibson's page. His career summary says his batting average was 374. But on Baseball Reference, the all-time career batting average list, he is not on there.
So that has to be a deal. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. That has to be a deal where it's only certain leagues that counted. So his full page would have everything he ever did, but then in the leaderboard page, it would only be the official at bats that would have counted, because they don't even show him in the top 50.
He's not on the list anywhere. I mean, I scrolled down to 100 and didn't see him. But
yeah, like Cool Papa Bell and people like that are on here, but not Gibson.
So I don't know why that would be.
Unless they just omitted or some, I don't know.
Maybe they're still working on it. Maybe we'll check back. We will revisit this topic. But yes. But so that's the trivia. Ty Cobb, number 1. Oscar Charleston, number 2. Rogers Hornsby, number 3. Joe Jackson, number 4.
So, haha, people yelling at me going down the road. You didn't know Oscar Charleston either off the top of your head.
Probably
but I do know who he is. I do know who he is, though. So that's shout out to me.
Yeah.
For almost getting a trivia question right again.
Almost. Well, you had it until I expanded it. So anyway, like I said before, a trivia question. There's a lot of publicity that this scandal has gotten over the last 100 years. Lots of books, lots of research, lots of movies, references in TV shows, and the like. And so it came to someone's attention over time that this story and this scandal had been expanded upon or potentially misunderstood or misreported. And so the Society for American Baseball Research decided to do their own research, because that's what they do. They wrote a journal article on the 100-year anniversary of this scandal titled 8 Myths Out. And on the centennial anniversary, their Black Sox scandal committee gave some facts about the biggest myths around the 1919 World Series, and we're going to run through them really quickly. Number one on this list is that Charles Comiskey was actually not that much of a Scrooge. Go figure. The myth is that the Black Sox threw the World Series because they were poorly paid and mistreated by Comiskey. Well, in fact, that season, the White Sox had one of the highest payrolls in baseball, and most of the players on that team were paid better than their peers in the American League. And so Comiskey gets a bad rap, and maybe wrongfully so. Number two on the list is the Cot bonus, which I didn't mention earlier, but the myth is that Comiskey ordered Cot benched down the stretch of the regular season to avoid paying him a $10,000 bonus if he won 30 games.
Mm-hmm.
He was sitting on 29. And the fact is that no bonus was promised, and Cot did have a chance to win his 30th game and clinch the pennant, but he was pulled after pitching poorly on September 24th of 1919.
That can be one of those myths that, like, we've all been in this situation. We believe we've been wronged, but not necessarily have been. So it still, in Cot's mind, could have been that he was wrongfully done. So still might have contributed. But yeah, no, he did not, in fact, have to do that. Yeah.
Number three, the myth is that the gamblers initiated the fix, when in reality, Chick Gandil and Eddie Cot approached the gamblers and initiated the fix as just a way to make extra money. So while the gamblers aren't completely at fault for starting this thing, they of course cannot get off scotch-free. Number four on the list is the myth is that before the final game, between games 7 and 8, pitcher Lefty Williams was threatened by one Arnold Rothstein by a hitman of his named Harry F. And I put that in air quotes. Harry F. was his name. He was threatened if he didn't promptly lose to the Cincinnati Reds in the first inning that he would be killed by this Harry F. gentleman. Well, the fact is that the author of the book 8 Men Out invented this fictional character on the advice of his publisher to guard copyright infringement.
Wow. So, okay, so this person, so this is where the story's like taking on its own situation. People are adding to the legend, adding to the myth, adding to the whatever. And so we get this fictionalized version of events. That's 100 years of history for you. I mean, that happens in just about every basically any story you know from history class is embellished in some way, big or small. So yeah, I buy that wholeheartedly. Yes.
Number 5 myth is that the fixing of the 1919 World Series was baseball's single sin, in air quotes again. It was an isolated incident. Well, guess what? It wasn't. The fact is that the Black Sox scandal was the culmination of a series of game-fixing incidents in the early 20th century, and eventually dozens of players were banned, suspended, or left out of baseball all together for their roles in various scandals.
I gotta say that's something that I think I knew, but that does surprise me because you feel like it was the one and that shut it down, but it's not. You're right. I mean, I knew that there were other gambling scandals. That's why Kennesaw Mountain Landis was being looked at as a commissioner, because he had been a judge. Yeah, but you feel, you feel like this is the only one that happened. I get that. Okay.
This is probably the most covered one.
Well, yes, for sure.
But yeah, other than like recent history and the Astros being only 3 years ago. Number 6, the myth is that league and team officials heard rumors of the World Series fix, but that there was no concrete evidence until the grand jury investigation almost a year later. Well, the fact is, based on this research, is that Charles Comiskey and others learned about the fix as early as Game 1, which was mentioned earlier, and that they maybe even knew it before Game 1 even happened. but they sat on this knowledge, hoping that nothing bad would happen. And then eventually it came out, and then Kennesaw Mountain Landis was hired to clean up the mess later. But I suppose I think Major League Baseball would like for people to think that there was no evidence of it, but it seems like everybody knew based on interviews after the fact and such.
Yeah, one thing that aids this story in being interesting is that we have this idea that gambling was illegal forever because it's illegal now and it was illegal for most of people's lives. Not necessarily the case. So, like, the idea that nobody would have been aware that on 2 days before the World Series, you were getting these odds for the Reds to win. And on the day of game one, it is dropped to essentially even money, right? You're getting your money back. You're getting that much money back as well. Like, you're doubling your money, but you're not actually getting any extra, which is what would normally happen if you were the underdog. The odds changed, and people would know the odds changed in 1919. They would have. And if regular people wouldn't have known, people like Charles Comiskey would have known. And so I buy this idea that that people were in the know, that people caught on that something was going on, that people had a wink, wink, nudge, nudge about it and just didn't want to make it a big deal because, I mean, like I said before, gambling can blow up your whole sport. So if you don't have to let people know, don't let people know. I mean, it's one of those things, the best interest of you is to just sit there and hope nobody else finds out. So I can see that 100%.
Number 7, at the trial for the Black Sox players, the courtroom found out by the prosecutor's statement during the trial that grand jury testimony from Seacott, Jackson, and Lefty Williams had been stolen. An actual written affidavit type document had been stolen where they were confessing to being a part of this and that it was mysteriously stolen from the courthouse. Well, there was a theft of the original transcripts from the prosecutor's office, but it was discovered well in advance. This was not a brand new development that happened in the middle of the trial. The player's testimony was actually recreated by grand jury stenographers before the trial. They used their shorthand notes, and it was read back to the jury, and it had no real effect on the trial. So while stuff did get taken, didn't make any difference. The documents were recreated, and everything was fine.
Okay.
And myth number 8. White Sox and Reds players were extremely reluctant to talk about the World Series. Well, that's not exactly the case because more than 100 interviews have been discovered involving participants in the 1919 World Series from both teams. This original myth started when Elliot Asinoff wrote 8 Men Out. He couldn't get people to talk to him initially. Well, people didn't want to talk. People may not wanted to talk to him. He could only get so many accounts for his book, and so the myth is that no one wanted to talk. Well, that's not exactly the case, and so lots of interviews have been uncovered, and plenty of people have come out. They've expressed remorse. They have claimed their innocence after the fact, including Joe Jackson, who went to his deathbed denying that he threw any of those games, even though he got banned and is not in the Hall of Fame for it, and all of this stuff. And so, interesting that how just one person's account of the events can skew the entire history of what actually happened.
Yeah, if you're the person who writes the story, or so if you're the one that writes the narrative that becomes the most famous and the most leaned upon, then you're the person who creates that story. Because, again, just in history, we view history as a narrative and not what it really is, which is just people reacting to things in real time. We view it as a narrative, and we put story elements into the way we tell history So when you write the first one, you have the most influence on the way that story looks to the general public, because now people are writing their stories, pulling information and citing yours. And so we go down this path where we get embellishments and we get things that were written as maybe sarcasm but are taken as truth. And I'm just saying a bunch of vague things here, but just to say that, yeah, you're right. Being the 8 Men Out book is the one that leads the charge in this. So that's the one. That's what everybody gets. That's what everybody reports on. That's what everybody hears about. That's what the movie's based on. And so that's what leads into it. And for better or worse, it's one of the reasons why, for many of the people listening to this podcast, you know the name Shoeless Joe Jackson. You may have known the name Ty Cobb. Probably didn't know the name Rogers Hornsby, right? So one of the reasons we know Shoeless Joe Jackson is because he's involved in this scandal. He's not in the Hall of Fame, but he's still a topic of conversation 100 years later because of some of the stuff in 8 Men Out. So it's a double-edged sword too. He's infamous because of these events.
It's fascinating. Had not thought of it that way. And all the credit for the 8 Myths Out again goes to Society for American Baseball Research. Go to their website, sabr.org/8-myths-out if you want to read all the information. They actually have links that they call further reading, that basically their references for debunking these myths in this journal. So there's a lot of really cool information in here. I haven't even read it all yet, but lots of links that go lots of different places, and biographies of players that were involved, and all kinds of cool
stuff. Saber knows their stuff for sure. One of the best things you can look at as a sports fan there. So, yep. I just got to say, Shoeless Joe Jackson, best average in the World Series, but also went like 5 for 21 in the games they lost. Just saying. I'm just saying. Like, I know he's supposed to have turned down the money, and I know he's supposed to have not been in all the meetings, but kind of was in the first one. And I know that, like, he denied it to his dying day, but, like, I don't know. He's a sympathetic character in the whole thing because he's not the brightest person in the world, and it's very easy to believe he was taken advantage of. And I think he probably was if he did do it. But I don't know. He made some mistakes in the field. He made some base running mistakes. And then magically in the games they were supposed to win, he's like lights out. I know we're not debating the Jackson thing. I just wanted to throw that out there that, like, you can't know. You cannot know either way if he did it or not. It's just impossible to figure out.
If he did do it on purpose, he did the best job of covering it and not making it the most obvious thing in the world.
He understood the assignment.
He
understood the assignment on that. Like, he's not pulling a Tim Donaghy out here and, like, making it obvious that he's blowing calls. But I mean, he didn't do anything to win those 5 games they lost. Just saying that.
Yeah, he's like, I'm equating it in my mind to like Randy Moss, when, like, he knows when to sprint on his go routes, or he knew when to sprint on his go routes, and he knew when it was useless.
Yeah.
Maybe Joe Jackson knew. He definitely did the best job at covering it up.
I've got one other thought. What is the manager doing? What is the manager of the White Sox doing when you keep throwing these dudes out here, and all they're doing is losing for you? I mean, it's a 9-game World Series, so we're talking about, like, Game 8 is over a week after Game 1. Like, we're a third of a month into the World Series, and you're still throwing these same 2 dudes. Like, at some point, you got to have a conversation about trust. Like, even if you don't know something's going on, you've got to be saying, are you going to pitch well today? Like, are you here for us? Or do I just need to, like, grab the ball boy, the milkman off the street? Like, because this is not,
ball boy would have been better.
Not working for me. Like, that's what's fishy. I mean, is blowing 1 start okay? Blowing 2 starts okay? Your third, you lose your third game of the
Yeah,
World Series. Like, why are you still pitching that guy?
I don't know. Kid, maybe I don't think Kid Gleason was in on the scandal, but I ain't saying. I'm just saying, and I think I'm going to leave it at that before I get in trouble here. And that, folks, is what you don't know about the 1919 Black Sox scandal. If you have any ideas, give them to us. We love talking about this stuff. If you have any ideas, any reviews, only 5 stars, please. That's all we ask. Until next time, see ya.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.
I've got a song from a Mickey Mouse Halloween special in my head.